Just Quinn, baby. Horns up and down go the champs. How much did Ewers improve his draft stock with a win in Ann Arbor? Mel Kiper and Field Yates have that answer. Plus, we're responding to your questions, your takes, and your draft dreams live as First Draft starts right now. Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to First Draft, the all-new edition. You can listen to us every week this college football season, every Thursday afternoon, live on the NFL on ESPN YouTube channel and wherever you get your podcasts. There they are, the two men you want to hear from, Mel and Field. I'm Greeny, here to ask the questions. Let's dive right into it. Gentlemen, this is the first ever edition of this podcast that takes place with both the NFL and college football seasons happening simultaneously. And one other reminder before we start, Mel has a big board up every Friday during this season. So we will start getting a sneak peek as to how last week's games are going to influence the big board as we have these conversations here for you every Thursday. And so let's start right at the very top. Mel, Quinn Ewers was, in a word, spectacular in Ann Arbor. 24 of 36, 246 yards, 3 touchdowns, and if he needed it to be more, it could have been more. How did Quinn Ewers impact where we will hear his name in April this past weekend?
The way he can sling it and the composure, I think, and how calm and relaxed he seems. And he just doesn't change his demeanor. And I think that is why he is one of those unflappable quarterbacks that you want to have under center. And I think Steve Sarkisian does a great job in terms of that offense and the design, the young players, the transfer stepping in that had to make up for some key losses. Like Xavier Worthy now with Kansas City doing what he does. Adonai Mitchell, tight end. Running back moves on Brooks. Then the top running back, Baxter, gets hurt, right? The offensive line had Cameron Williams step in at right tackle. He had like 4 penalties in the first half, yet they overcame all this against this great vaunted Michigan defense, right? At the big house with all eyes on this game. He looked like it was no big deal. It was ho-hum Field. It was just like no big deal to Quinn Ewers. And I think players feed off of his ability to go into any environment. He did it last year at Bryant-Denny Stadium in Tuscaloosa when he upset Alabama. Yep. And here he did it against Michigan. It wasn't an upset. They were a 6.5-point favorite, but still a game where all eyes were on him. And look how he responded. So, yeah, he's got to be right there. In my opinion, right now, he's got to be right there as the elite quarterback in this draft, the QB1, with Carson Beck, Georgia, Shedeur Sanders, still an offensive line that keeps getting him hit after hit after hit. So, I think Cam Ward, Miami, and Jalen Milroe, Alabama, will be there to challenge. But I think you can make a strong case right now, Field, that Quinn Ewers is QB1 in this draft.
Yeah, he entered the quarterback one chat after Saturday afternoon's performance, Mel. And if you think about what Quinn brings to the table that's different from maybe Shedeur Sanders or Carson Beck, I think the overall physical skill set is lesser than those two players, right? Quinn's not going to blow you away with a cannon of an arm. He's not this surreal athlete that can hurt you all the time with his legs out on the perimeter and turn a scramble into a 50-yard gain. So what does he have to do at a very high level to be successful? And the answer is he has to be an excellent decision maker, which you already alluded to. He has to be terrific with in-pocket mobility. We always get hung up on these plays where these quarterbacks make jaw-dropping scrambles, which, by the way, those can be very, very effective. But some of the best quarterbacks that weren't elite combine-type athletes, I'm not trying to say that Quinn Ewers is on this level. Part of what made Tom Brady and Drew Brees and Peyton Manning so great was their in-pocket navigation. Yeah, they weren't 4-4 guys, but their ability to sense pressure, dodge pressure, step up into the pocket, buy yourself that extra half second to make a great decision and turn a would-be sack into a would-be touchdown separated them on top of other ways as well. And we saw such good decision-making from Quinn Ewers in Michigan. And I know people are going to sit here and say, but yeah, Michigan might stink this year. That's the truth. Michigan is so limited offensively that team could finish anywhere by the end of the season. And it wouldn't surprise me, Greeny. But I will say this. My top 25 big board includes 2 Michigan defensive players. Heck, my top 8 players includes 2 Michigan defensive players. And it wouldn't surprise me if at least half a dozen guys from that defense get drafted this upcoming year. I get it. The offense gives them a much stiffer task every single week on the defensive side of the ball, but the individual talent that Quinn Ewers picked apart on Saturday afternoon was exceptional.
And Mel and Field, both of you, I'd love you to take the listeners and the viewers someplace they can't go. And I only know the answer to this question ahead of time, Mel, because I have listened to you and Louis Riddick go back and forth on our draft calls before, in the weeks leading up to the draft. How much more important are these games? And Texas will have a few of them, of course, playing in the SEC now. They'll have a few more monster games. But how much more closely do the evaluators, meaning guys like yourselves, and of course, the people who are making these decisions for these teams, how much more closely do they evaluate games like this relative to the more mundane game on the schedule?
It's huge, but you also have to put it in perspective, because when Josh Allen, my guy, right, Granny, went to Wyoming, Iowa, because Wyoming goes to Iowa, right? And he's playing in that game where all eyes are on Josh Allen, the Wyoming quarterback, going into Iowa City, into Kinnick Stadium, that first game of the year. And everybody was going to evaluate Josh Allen based on that game. Wyoming had lost to the National Football League. They're starting center, top running back, tight end, wide receiver, all of whom ended up playing in the National Football League. Wyoming, Craig Bohl, great coach, right? Former coach at Wyoming, great coach, couldn't reload. He had Josh, but he lost 4 key entities. He goes to play Iowa with that defense at Kinnick Stadium, tough place to play, and they got beat. I was like 24-3. He didn't look good. And people say, oh, that game, it really raised doubts and concern. No, you throw that game out. Josh Allen had no chance. Shedeur Sanders right now at Colorado doesn't have a chance. But in Quinn Ewers' case, he has a chance because he's got the better team. He was the favorite, right? At Alabama last year, he was the underdog, but he found a way to do it. But he still had great players around him. Worthy, Mitchell. Think about the O-line with Jones at right tackle, the running back Brooks. He had all these pieces, right? Sanders, a tight end. He's got pieces right now. They're the favorite. Michigan, yes, great defense. Fields right. A lot of those guys are going to be in the NFL. But his offense had everything back just about. When you talk about the key guys, 4 offensive linemen, I always say you can't beat them if you can't block them. We saw that in the NFL in some of these games. We see it in college. They can block them. The running back doesn't matter. Give them the ball. The freshman was dynamic. Okay, Blue had played a lot. You think about Gunnar Helm at tight end. He had played. Think about what a guy coming in. Isaiah Bond from Alabama, he had already done it at Alabama. So there were players there in place for him to say, my team's not outmanned. I have no excuses. So for Quinn Ewers to play like he did, yes, it was impressive, but you put in perspective, they were the favorite. But if he didn't play well, you say, yeah, it would be a red flag, because there's no reason why Quinn Ewers, despite the environment, shouldn't have played well. He had the pieces. He had the better team. And if he struggled, it would be a problem. In Josh Allen's case, there are people that thought it was a problem. They don't know how to evaluate, because you throw it out. You don't worry about that. When a player's hurt and he's cutting it out, you don't scrutinize him if he's playing at 50% or 60%. Bottom line is, in Shedeur Sanders' case, his team doesn't help him. That offensive line is still leaky. Okay, running the football, problematic. Shedeur Sanders, everybody's going to rip and criticize. He said it. Did Raiola get hit much? I did. I'm not making an excuse. I'm saying, look at the other quarterback. How much did he get hit? Bottom line is, you need help as a quarterback. Ewers gets it. And Shedeur Sanders' case right now, he's not getting it.
Yeah, Greeny, just to double back to the question about just how much these big game environments do influence the evaluation, what I will say is that every game, and if you ever go to the press box, which I'm not sure how many of our viewers, listeners have stepped inside of a press box, you'll see a seating chart. And that seating chart will show you who is there from not just the media outlets, but also from NFL teams, right? And typically GMs have a bit more time towards the beginning or the very end of the NFL regular season to get out on the road and scout a few players. And you cannot overstate just how influential the in-person scouting can be for high-level decision makers, in part because they don't get to do it every single weekend, right? They're busy with managing their own roster. If they're playing an away game in a city that doesn't have a big football game around it, it complicates the logistical side of it. But beyond that, Greeny, is there's so much that you can pick up when you're on the field. How does the player prepare before the game? What's his body type look like, right? I mean, these GMs are just watching film. You know, guys can look like they're 6'2" and end up being 6'4" when you actually meet them in person. Quinn Ewers is the quarterback. How is he interacting with the offensive line before the game? How is he warming up with his receivers before the game? How does the roster respond to him? Some of the leadership in the intangibles, which no position in sports has the word intangibles attached to it more than the quarterback's. all of those are much more measurable when you're actually boots on the ground. And while I haven't seen the full list, I can tell you from talking to multiple people that were there on behalf of NFL teams for the Michigan-Texas game on Saturday, it was a packed house. There were a ton of eyes there, not just specifically on Quinn Ewers, but certainly Quinn made a very strong impression of all of them.
Well, I actually can add something to that because I tweeted about exactly this. I was thinking of the two of you while I was watching that game, and I tweeted, this is a game that's going to be remembered in April. And Pete Thamel, who was there, tweeted back at me, the sideline in Ann Arbor is jammed with NFL folks, was told 3 GMs, nearly a dozen high-ranking personnel, and 15 teams. A bunch of those had multiple scouts. So, Field, to your point, that's trying to put some at least rough numbers to what you're talking about. So we almost can't overstate the importance of that performance. You mentioned Shedeur Sanders.
Yeah.
Field, I'll start with you on this one. So Shedeur Sanders' team is just not very good. I mean, you watch them play. Nebraska is not going to win the Big Ten, and they didn't belong on the same field with them. So I would imagine, Field, that evaluation is going to be complicated. And I get the offensive line is a problem and he's running for his life. But the one play he throws that ball from his own end zone, I happen to be sitting in a room with all of the guys who were doing NFL Countdown. We were there having dinner and that game is on. And I mean, the groans that just emanated from all sides of the room. What is your perspective on that, Field? I'll start with you. And however much he could damage his own stock.
So that was Tommy Hill, by the way, the corner from Nebraska with that 7-yard pick six, number 32 in the Yates mock draft 1.0. I know Kiper had his eyes on that way too early mock draft, but Tommy Hill, a good prospect. We'll talk about it at some point later on in the show. But Greeny, or at some point later on in the season, I should say, here is what you are very wary of when you have a quarterback who's playing behind an offensive line that candidly is broken. Does the broken offensive line lead to bad habits from the quarterback? And that's what I felt like we saw on Saturday evening, was that Shedeur Sanders was playing like a quarterback who felt like if he did not make Superman plays on every drive, his team had no chance. And maybe the reality is they wouldn't have had a chance even if he was Superman, but you have to avoid this becoming a pattern throughout the season because Shedeur with a clean pocket is as gifted of a thrower as we have in this entire draft right now. I feel strongly about that. It is beautifully mechanical. I mean, his mechanics are perfect. He is going to absolutely crush it at pro days because he is just a marvel as a thrower. But the pressure has been so bad that it's forced him into inaccuracy and bad decisions, or at least did in that second game. And you just hope as the schedule continues to get tougher and tougher and tougher for Shedeur in this Colorado offense, that it does not lead to repeatable habits, because those are the kind of things that NFL evaluators are going to be keeping a very, very close eye on, Mel.
It's going to be easy to get down on him. I mean, to state the obvious, if you watch the game, you say, how is he ranked that high?
Yeah.
But you got to, as a quarterback, whatever level you're playing, you got to get help from your teammates. And Shedeur last year against Oregon, everybody was primed to watch that game, right? It's an Oregon against Colorado. It's at Autzen Stadium. How is he going to play? He had no chance in that game. And he had no chance against Nebraska. Those guys up front, Ty Robinson's a good player. The defensive tackle is a good player. But they just completely destroyed that offensive line for Colorado. Shedeur has no chance. So what could he do? Yeah, he's trying to make plays. He goes, what's the difference? You lose by 20, you lose by 30, you lose by 50. You're going to lose, but you got to try to fight some way. He wasn't worrying about stats. He's just trying to get it done any way he can. So for Shedeur, hey, against teams that aren't that good, yeah, Colorado can compete. But against teams like Nebraska, who are an improved team, Matt Rule in year 2 always has his teams turning it around. Matt Rule knew this team with Raiola at quarterback could be a team that could win 8, 9, 10 games, maybe. So certainly 8. I think over under in Vegas, if you want a season total, I think it was 7.5 on Nebraska. People were scared because they hadn't done it. Well, guess what? They're going to do it. They're going to get that at 8 number, barring any injury to anybody key like Raiola. Dylan Raiola is going to be special. But in terms of Shedeur Sanders, it's going to be a hard deal all year to figure out where he really ranks because he's not going to get the help. So what you want to do with him is when they line up and they can compete up front and he gets time. And when he is pressured a little bit, not every play, but how does he deal with that? When it's really stacked, where it's an evaluation game where he had a fighting chance, how does he play? When he doesn't have a fighting chance, you throw the game out. But when he has a fighting chance, how does he perform? That's when we'll know who the real Shedeur Sanders is in terms of a grade going into the National Football League.
If I could add one thing, Greeny, on top of what Mel just said, is that you want to evaluate the stuff when the offensive line can actually protect Shedeur Sanders. But when they can't, I think there's something really important that NFL teams are going to be watching as well. Is how does Shedeur handle it? Right? After the game, if they lose, if they get humbled consistently, like they were humbled on Saturday afternoon, do you start to hear about how everybody else isn't doing their job and no one's giving me a chance? Or do you hear from Shedeur, like, we all got to be better, and I got to be the rising tide that floats the proverbial boats on my offense, right? I think that it wasn't nearly this dramatic last year with Caleb Williams, but I remember talking to people last year in the scouting process who said that, yeah, the offensive line, not great. Wide receivers, not great for Caleb Williams. Never lost confidence, never lost the competitive edge last year. And the bright lights were all over Caleb Williams last year. And Shedeur, I hope, maintains that same sort of aura about him that I know he had coming into the season, is that, yeah, it's not perfect. They know that they have the deck of cards stacked against them because of how poor the offensive line play is, but continue to be the same leader that you have been, and that'll bode really well for you staying as one of the top draft picks in the NFL.
Well, and the one thing he does have is he has Travis Hunter on his side. 10 catches in that game. And Mel, I could not help but notice you have him ranked as number 1 on your early big board. Explain that for people who might be confused.
Travis Hunter was going to go to Florida State and went to Jackson State, was obviously a guy that everybody knew would be spectacular on both sides of the ball. And that was the projection. That's what everybody envisioned, and that's what he's become. Where do you play him? We talked about that a lot last week. As a corner, he's outstanding. As a receiver, 10 catches. Obviously, if Shedeur has time, he's going to have a ton more than that as the year progresses because he's their go-to guy. Will Shepherd came from Vanderbilt, solid player. They got other guys came in as well. Wester came in. But again, you're looking at a kid here who is, in a word, special. And as a pure football player, he competes. He competes hard in the fourth quarter. I saw him saying, wish the ball could have got to me. He's out there. He got hurt. You could see he was banged up a little bit because he's taking hits. I mean, he throws that body around tackling and he takes hits catching the ball. So at the end of the day, he is beat up, yet he isn't complaining. He's not looking to get to the sideline. His body language, his demeanor is competitive. That's all he's about. Travis is an unbelievable kid. And to me, as a pure football player, and I love Will Johnson at Michigan. He's number 2 on the board. I love all my guys cutting after the quarterback. Field talked about him last week. Pierce from Tennessee. Williams, who's all banged up right now at Georgia. And Abdul Carter at Penn State. But for me, the best pure football player in this draft is Travis Hunter.
It's certainly an interesting debate for this reason. And here's the reason why I don't have him ranked number 1 overall, is that I believe, we talked about this last week, it's going to be really hard for Travis Hunter to play on both sides of the ball at the NFL level. Historical precedent tells us that it's very, very rare. Now, he is rare himself. Perhaps he bucks the trend and becomes the next edition of the man he currently plays for, Deion Sanders, in the NFL. But even Deion was, people who weren't alive during Deion's playing career, but just know who he is, probably think of him as, the shutdown corner, right? Was the famous Deion quote, like, water covers 70% of the earth and I cover the rest of it, or whatever the exact phrase was from Deion. It was an all-timer, as he is prone to do. But I think if you just ask me who's the best corner in the class, I think it's Will Johnson. If you ask me who do I think is the best wide receiver in the class, I think it's Tedero McMillan, which is why I couldn't get Hunter all the way up to number 1, even though, as Mel said, he's the best pure football player in the entire draft class. I think he's going to have to plant his flag on one side or the other, and there might be slightly better options depending on which position he ends up choosing.
Yeah, and think about this, guys. Brady, just think about how tough it is to do both. You're talking about practice, getting ready for an opponent. You're just trying to figure out, okay, who's the receiver I got to work in? What am I doing on offense? And in your mind, you're thinking both sides, and you're the key entity on this team on both sides of the ball for a major college program. This isn't Jackson State. This is Colorado playing against top-level teams. So from just a mental standpoint, all it's thrown at him, like I say, to be able to define yourself as this or that allows you to focus 100% of your energy, of your preparation, everything on one spot. He can't do that. So again, if he could just be a corner or just be a receiver, it would be a different ball game entirely. And his body at the end, you get into the third, fourth quarter of a game, or the second quarter or fourth quarter after halftime, which are long half times in college football. That second quarter, he's hurting a little bit. Fourth quarter, he's hurting a lot. So to go and be put through that, and then the preparation that it takes to play both spots and the expectations he's dealing with as well. And like I said, he's playing through pain. He's got to every week. That is, to me, is remarkable.
It was a tough game to watch in a lot of ways. All right,
Yeah.
fellas. So let's jump around here. I'm going to we have a first draft group chat, and Field Yates texted the group chat. Now, Mel, I don't know how often you check the group chat.
This will be the first time.
He wrote the following: I am in the Kiper school of not taking running backs in round one. That being said, this kid looks like one of the best 20 players in the country right now. He may not be a name everyone knows, Field. Tell everyone who this kid is and why they're going to know him as the season continues.
Yeah, it's Boise State running back Ashton Jeanty, who now has 9 rushing touchdowns through 2 games this season. And by the way, a big chunk of those came against the University of Oregon, coached by the great Dan Lanning, with a bunch of defensive draft picks on that side of the ball. A little bit of historical perspective on how many times you see 9 rushing touchdowns in the first 2 games of the season. It hasn't happened since Ricky Williams, as in Heisman Trophy winner back in 1998, Ricky Williams. But Ashton Jeanty has been absolutely remarkable for Boise State so far this season. And he was great, by the way, last year as well. This is not some Johnny-come-lately. What I've been so impressed by as a runner from Ashton Jeanty is this contact balance. No one brings this guy down the first time that he gets hit. He finds ways to chew up yards after contact. He has been prolific in every facet of the game, except for one so far this season, Mel, that only adds to why he's so valuable. I thought on summer tape was the best pass catching back that I studied of the 10 or so that I got to, because it is a deep running back draft class. I thought he was excellent in that regard, and we haven't seen that much of it. That only adds to why I think there's a chance, Mel, even if fundamentally you and I disagree with the concept, that Ashton Jeanty, if he keeps up this current season pace, could be a late first-round pick.
No question about it. Now, I have him 19 on the big board. I always say you rate players based on ability. You don't rate players based on my feeling about running backs, my philosophy. You don't rank on philosophy. If I ranked on philosophy, then it would make no sense, because why do you have him in the second round, third round, just because he's a great running back and you don't believe on ability? He's probably right now, I'm going to update it for Friday. Okay. He's one of your top 12 players in this draft on ability right now. He's one of the, I had him at 19. He's one of the top 12 to 14. So could he get into that Christian McCaffrey, Leonard Fournette area of the first round? Okay. Saquon Barkley area of the first round. Could he go up into that grouping? Maybe. Running backs, I don't know if I started it. I don't know if I'm finishing it. I don't know if I'm going to change again, but I can go back to 1999 draft. And I said this like 25 years ago when Champ Bailey was in that draft. 2 running backs went high and went ahead of Champ Bailey. It was Edgerrin James and Ricky Williams, who we just talked about, Greeny. So to me, it's not 1999. We're going to have 2 in the top grouping, top 5, but we could have 1 still get up there. And if it is 1, Amarian Hampton, North Carolina, is a heck of a back. But the special back right now is Ashton Jeanty at Boise State for what he's done and what he's done even going into the year. Like I said, I had him 19 going into the Oregon game. After the Oregon game, you got to think about getting him into that top 12, top 14, which means if he keeps climbing, then he gets into that discussion. Then it gets back to philosophy or just go with your ranking. You need a running back. I don't believe in Kiper. I think Kiper's crazy with that goofy philosophy. Running backs are vital. They still make sense. This kid's look at Christian McCaffrey, but he's on his second team, guys. He's not on his first team. But if you can catch like Field said, and you can be multi-dimensional, and you're just not a one-trick running back, you're just not a runner, but you can catch and you can block, then I think there's going to be that temptation if a team needs one high to take an Ashton Jeanty from Boise State.
Yeah, Bijan Robinson, I think, is the most recent example, right, of a guy who was just so spectacular he winds up going in the top 10 of the draft. So we'll see. All right, so sort of getting back to quarterbacks as we jump around a little bit. We talked a lot about Carson Beck last week. He had the incredible opening performance against Clemson, put up more monster numbers last week against Tennessee Tech. I guess pretty much what was to be expected, 5 touchdowns in that game. But Mel, we also talked about Cam Ward, and you have him ranked as your 4th best quarterback. He had another huge day, albeit against Florida A&M. Very strong performances. Where could he, Mel, start creeping up to as we work our way through this season?
It's going to be hard to get past where we are with Quinn Ewers and Carson Beck. Shedeur is going to be kind of the wild card in this. I hope he gets some help moving forward. But in terms of Cam Ward, he has it. He has the pieces in place around him. And that's going to allow him to have a probably an 11-12 win season at Miami and be a playoff caliber team. So the way he can, and I'd say he's so entertaining. I get so tired of people wanting cookie cutter quarterbacks. Everybody wants to, I don't want the check down kings. I don't want the bubble screen sensations. I want a guy that's going to take chances. You make mistakes. And I always say, we're fans of teams. Now, some are fans of fantasy guy players, right? For fantasy, you want certain guys to be successful. If you bet on a game, if you're a gambler, boy, you want that guy to be winning your money, right? You're betting, you're gambling, right? You're an ESPN bet. But if you're a fan of the team, I'm a Baltimore Raven fan, Grinny, you're a Jet fan, Field, you have your teams you're pulling for. If you're not, what do you want to be on Saturday or Sunday? Particularly, let's talk about Sunday. Entertained, right? You want to be entertained watching a game that you really have no rooting interest for anybody, because maybe there's no fantasy league player there. You're not really a fan of that team, but you're watching a game. Entertainment. Cam Ward is going to be entertaining to watch. And I look at the league right now, and you can go to that list. Why is Lamar Jackson? He's entertaining. Josh Allen, everybody was ripping early in his career. He was entertaining when he was reckless, right? And he's still going to be reckless. That's Josh. I heard even Callahan say about Will Levis, well, it's not sustainable. You got to protect. Well, guess what? Josh never listened to that. Not sustainable. Josh Allen got his left hand injured by diving over and trying to get a touchdown. His 4 touchdowns, 2 rushing, 2 passing. He's never changing. So it may not be sustainable. Lamar's not changing who he is. Lamar will gain weight. He'll lose weight. Lamar's going to be running around, right? So again, for me, Cam Ward, the way he goes about his business is a little bit different. The release is unorthodox. He'll be different, but he's going to sling. He's going to let it go, and he's going to be throwing across the field. He's going to take chances. I love watching Cam Ward play. I think he could ascend to QB3 after all said and done. Could he get into the first round discussion? I think he could.
I think so too. I think for sure he can get into the first round conversation. I mentioned this last week, but the ball flies off of Cam Ward's hand. I mean, I use the analogy of the baseball closer who comes in and throws 102-mile-per-hour cheese with Cam Ward. And the impressive part is that he doesn't need to have his feet set, steady base, big drop back. No, he can be basically off platform and throw the ball 1,000,000 miles per hour. Now, this is not a contest of who can throw the football the fastest. He's also doing so with good accuracy as well. And while I know that this is a show about the draft, part of the draft is the order, and it's in between weeks 1 and week 2. We don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but snap reactions after week 1. And this is part of the calculus, right, Greeny, is that they're going to be teams picking near the top of the order. They're going to need a quarterback, and they're not going to wait, right? And so part of how these quarterbacks or how high they go is just how many teams find themselves in a position that they are going to need to draft one. Early targets obviously include teams like the New York Giants and probably the Las Vegas Raiders, depending on how their season goes as well. But Carolina, I'm trying to my best to be prudent here and be responsible, because I thought Bryce Young was a hell of a player coming out in the draft. And I still believe there is a good football player trapped inside of there. But no team was more dispiriting in week 1 than the Panthers. And we're now a season and a game in. And I think there are Panthers fans that are already saying, do we need to pivot once again? So part of how high a Cam Ward, a Jalen Milroe, Quinn Ewers, et cetera, goes is how many teams hit rock bottom with their quarterback spot. And after week 1, there are a few teams that are thinking about pressing that panic button.
It's a very interesting thought, Mel, and obviously I cover the NFL on Sundays more than I cover the college on the Saturdays, and I do find that a fascinating notion. You both, of course, will remember when Arizona pivoted after just 1 season from Josh Rosen to Kyler Murray, and that was controversial, but in retrospect, it was the right thing to do.
Totally.
And look, it's 1 game in. I'm with you, Field. I'm not writing off Bryce Young. No one should. God bless him. I hope he has a magnificent career and bounces back. But if things continue to progress at the rate that they are, Mel, that does feel like one of the places that people are going to be looking at.
Patience is a virtue. It's not a quarterback. Quarterbacks in the NFL, it's like, hey, if you don't get it done, I don't care if you have 10 starts. I don't care if you have 15 starts or 50 starts. It doesn't matter. We're going to kick you to the curb if you don't get it done, especially when you're not the guy that coach brought in or that GM brought in. Yeah. Then good luck. Good luck on that one. So again, that's just the way it is. It's the most important position in any sport, all sports, quarterback in the National Football League, and they're not allowing players, the quarterbacks, to develop. You can't. It's hard to get through rough spots. It's difficult. And what happened with Josh Allen? Josh Allen was drafted by Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott. Okay, he had some rough moments, but they didn't cut the cord. They stuck with Josh when a lot of people said I was getting calls constantly. Josh Allen, I won't say the word. I won't say it on this podcast. Well, it wasn't flattering. Okay. And I would have to defend again, Josh Allen. Again, this is what happens with these quarterbacks. And at some point, you just got to give it up. Okay. But there's got to be, you mentioned Kyler Murray with Josh Rosen. There were some that thought they should have taken Bosa and stuck with Rosen. So there was a lot of difference of opinion when that came out in real time. In hindsight now, it's why? Because Kyler was special that year, right? Is there going to be a quarterback who's that good? Right now, it doesn't look like Shedeur's got a chance to be special. I think we can all agree about that. Can Carson Beck? Yeah, he's got the talent. He lost Bowers and McConkey. He's still got a lot of talent around him, right? Then you think about where we are with Quinn Ewers. We thought he lost talent, but he's got talent that Sark recruited. Cam Ward, Jalen Miller, all these quarterbacks have talent around them. So they're going to have a chance to have success. So I think in the case of hey, like I say it all the time, adapt or die. And I'm adapting. These quarterbacks, hey, if you don't get it done, I can defend them all I want. I'm going to lose some cases. All defense attorneys don't win every case. I'm going to lose some cases because people are going to say enough's enough. It's not my guy. And when it's not, instead of an extra year, you don't get that extra year if it's not your guy. Right. Now you may, and I asked Giants fans, do you like Malik Neighbors? You wouldn't have had him. Okay. You wouldn't have had him. You move up, get Drake May, or you would have drafted McCarthy, which they didn't. You don't have Malik Neighbors. Okay. And Daniel Jones is coming off an ACL. I believe it was in November. That's if last time I checked, that's less than a year away. And I noticed Van Ginkel, who was a hell of a player at Wisconsin, Andrew Van Ginkel, a very underrated player. Josh Allen knows him because he's a thorn in the side of all quarterbacks. And he tackled Daniel Jones, looked like he had a touchdown. And his quickness, his burst wasn't there. And Van Ginkel tackled him before he had a chance to get in the end zone. Van Ginkel intercepts a pass. Van Ginkel snuffs things out. Bottom line is, when you think about Daniel Jones, he's not where he will be when he's 100% coming back from that ACL, but he's not going to have time to show it. And by the way, I love the 100 years, but those uniforms got to go. But
they got to go.
That looked bad from the start. They lost that game before it started. I'm big into how you look, and that didn't look good. Bottom line is, Daniel Jones doesn't look like right now he's confident in his body because they don't play in the preseason much. He's coming off an ACL from November. But this organization now looks like Daboll's ready to go to Drew Lock at some point. So I would say against the Washington football team on Sunday, Daniel Jones doesn't get it done. It looks like it could be Drew Lock in there at some point. Hopefully Daniel does. But that's just the way the quarterbacks. I'm going to sit here and say, expect it. If it's not your guy and your quarterback struggling, they're going to cut. They're going to cut ties pretty quick.
And then sometimes field guys get resurrected. And I know this isn't where we meant to go, but in that very same game, while the Giants were dressed as the Montreal Canadiens, Sam Darnold may have been reborn. Sam Darnold the one thing Sam Darnold may have needed all through his career, or actually there are three things, and they're named Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, and Kevin O'Connell, and he might be the most important one of all. So you never know with these guys. Let's get a quick thought on that, and then our producer Joe is going to kill me because they keep taking us away from where I'm supposed to be. But I think that's a good one. The guys come in the league. Sam Darnold's a perfect example of it. The Jets destroyed him. Whatever talent he had, the Jets gave him absolutely he was there for 3 seasons. They tanked 2 of them. They had he had no chance to succeed. Now his lot in life is to be a journeyman unless he gets ridiculously lucky. And maybe he's gotten ridiculously lucky. One guy's misfortune, which is the injury to J.J. McCarthy, winds up giving Darnold, instead of being a bridge quarterback, now he gets a chance to play. And who knows what may happen. Crazy things happen sometimes.
Yeah, and it's a good situation for Sam in this regard now, Greeny, is that the expectations are very low coming into the year. He was the guy that was only the starting quarterback until they drafted J.J. McCarthy. The minute they drafted J.J., it was a matter of how long until they benched Sam Darnold. Now there's no threat. He should be playing free and confidently. Their schedule gets much more difficult for the next 8 weeks, so it's going to be a tough test for Sam, but it's nice to see Sam playing in a system where the coach seemingly really believes in him as well.
Yeah, so this is the new First Draft podcast where now we are live as opposed to how you guys always did it so beautifully during the draft season, which we will do this year, 2 episodes per week during the draft season. But now doing it during the year, we can focus not just on the draft eligible players in college, but also on some of the bigger NFL storylines as they relate to the draft as well. I have 2 more players I want to get in here before we turn to the questions on Twitter, which we've been taking from the listeners. Let's start with the good one. Abdul Carter. You mentioned his name earlier briefly. Field, let's talk about him, the linebacker from Penn State. They had probably a tougher game against Bowling Green than we were expecting. I don't know that he's a name that everybody knows. He's a name everyone is starting to get to know.
Yeah, and you said linebacker, Greeny. We might be calling him an edge, or we should be calling him an edge now, because after last season, they graduated both Chop Robinson and Adisa Isaac, a first and third round pick, respectively. Penn State said, number 11 for us, who a certain other linebacker turned edge / still occasional linebacker down in Dallas also wore number 11 for the Nittany Lions. Pretty darn good player, of course, that being Micah Parsons. Abdul Carter, it's hard to compare anybody to Micah, given how dominant he is at the NFL level. But shades of that do come into your brain when you're watching him on film. The juice to get off the line of scrimmage is simply ridiculous. It's a very, very good edge class. And on top of the fact that it's very good and at the top of the board, it's also a little bit of what are you looking for? Abdul Carter is not as bulky and twitched up as a guy like Nick Scourton, like from Texas A&M, or maybe even a Michael Williams. This guy has an electric first step. His ability to get into the backfield before the ball is seemingly out of the center's hands is incredible. He is a natural pass rusher with some serious juice off the edge, Mel. I know you got him way up on the inaugural big board.
Yeah, having him at number 6, Abdul Carter, to me, is prime for a huge year. And a Micah Parsons type year is where you're talking about what Micah Parsons became with the Dallas Cowboys. Remember, he didn't play that final year at Penn State, that COVID year, but I think that's what you're looking for, that type of special player that Micah Parsons is with the Dallas Cowboys. And I'll tell you what, I'll go a little off script. I watched the game Friday night. Jack, I don't know if you saw it, Field and Greeny. Jack Kelly. Remember that name, Jack Kelly, for BYU. This kid came from Weber State, where he was Big Sky Conference Defensive Player of the Year at 10 sacks. I was in amazement. He got from point A to point B in a blink, like it was shot out of a cannon. This is a 6'2", 240-pound linebacker who dominated at Weber State, can fly to the football, had 4 quarterback hits, a sack, 1.5 tackles for loss, 5 tackles. He's all over the field against SMU, keying that upset victory for BYU. So for Jack Kelly, 4th-year junior, watch this kid, number 17. We had Kyle Van Noy at BYU. You had Fred Warner, Kurt Gavea, great Washington Redskins linebacker, right? We've had linebackers at BYU. You know, Taki was there as well. But for me, Jack Kelly is the next great BYU linebacker. This kid is, about entertaining to watch. Whoa, he is through the roof. Jack Kelly, linebacker, BYU, phenomenal talent.
He's officially on my watch list now. Thank you, Mel.
And then I know I want to get one more in, because the story of college football this past weekend was Notre Dame losing to Northern Illinois. Mel, my condolences. We're recording this on the day after the Jets lost in San Francisco, so you and I are feeling somewhat similar pain. But from the draft perspective, I mean, that's a game that you're obviously supposed to win. Notre Dame, I think, was a 29-point favorite. So this is sort of the flip side question of the one we had earlier. Field, I asked you, Quinn Ewers against Michigan, how much more weight do you put into that game? Let me give you the reverse. You're Riley Leonard. You're supposed to easily handle Northern Illinois. And not only do you lose, but you look bad. I mean, I thought he looked very bad myself. How much will that impact his chances? I mean, I've heard people talk about him maybe in round 1. How much will that hurt him?
It's got a long ways to go before we talk about him as a first-round pick anytime going forward, Greeny, because he wasn't the reason they won in a big, not an upset, but a big win down at Texas A&M in week 1. But he was part of the reason why they lost in week 2 against Northern Illinois, that historic upset for that NIU program. Riley Leonard is an excellent athlete. He's a very good runner. You can do a lot of different things with him. He's a quarterback, though. And if you can't run, if you can't throw, but you can run, it's not going to work at the NFL level. And there is no vertical presence right now for Notre Dame in the passing game. And a lot of quarterbacks can make throws within 5 or 8 or 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. The lack of confidence, though, is alarming right now for Riley Leonard. It does not look like he believes he is going to make these throws down the field. And while Notre Dame doesn't have this alpha star wide receiver, they got a good draftable tight end and Mitchell Evans, who might be a top 50, top 60, top 75 pick really early in the process, but a good tight end to know. And they got, it's Notre Dame. They always have a capable offensive line. I'm surprised the offense has looked as non-functional as it has through 2 games. And I do think we can trace that, Mel. And you watch this team as close as any in college football to the ineffectiveness of Riley Leonard. Right now, he does not look like a quarterback that a team would be drafting with plans of starting him. He looks purely like a backup developmental quarterback at this stage of the college season.
Yeah, when he was at Duke, he was a much different quarterback. And of course, he had the injury and he's with a new team and he hasn't had the reps with his team. And their offensive line lost a key component to injury before the year began. Yep. So this offensive line isn't where it needs to be. Mitchell Evans is coming off an injury. He's working his way back to 100%, right? So there's a lot of things going on within this offense for Riley Leonard. New quarterback, new team, off an injury. And they said it. We read our press clippings. We were thinking we could just throw our helmets on the field. Green said it. We're a 4-touchdown favorite. We're home. We're playing Northern Illinois. What's there to get excited about here? We just, won on the road against A&M, and look what happened. So again, I think people are going to look at that and say, okay, this is a teaching moment for every other head coach is saying the same thing to their team. Look what happened to Notre Dame. But I think to your point, there's other players out there, and you say, okay, with the portal, how's the Jalen Royals at Utah State stay at Utah State, right? Jalen Royals field, he's on your watch list. He should be on everybody's watch list. Jalen Royals against USC had 6 catches, didn't have a lot of chances because obviously USC dominated the game. But Jalen Royals had 15 touchdown catches 2 years ago. He is a special player. He is going to be a high pick. Tyler Neville, I saw at Virginia, tight end. He transferred from Harvard. He was lights out against Wake Forest. He brought him back in that game. In the second quarter, when they were down 17-3, had 2 touchdown catches. His father, Tommy, played at Navy. His brother played at Army, and he's playing at Virginia, was at Harvard, where he was great. Tyler Neville is a kid that's going to be on everybody's radar, because what I saw for Virginia when they played Wake Forest, Tyler Neville stood out to me. Jalen Royals did as well. And I'll tell you what, for USC, Eric Gentry, an all-purpose linebacker, can do everything. He's 6'6". He's about 215, 220 pounds, was at Arizona State. He had some injuries last year. Eric Gentry is flying around. He's coming from all directions. He's their leading him in tackles. You lead him in solos. He's leading him in tackles. He's doing everything for USC's defense. So Eric Gentry for USC linebacker, Jalen Royals, wide receiver, Utah State, Tyler Neville, tight end, Virginia, and Jack Kelly, linebacker, BYU, are 4 guys that jumped out to me this past week.
Okay, so every week here, I've promised we're going to be taking your questions from Twitter X and using the hashtag #FirstDraft. Now, Joe is our producer, so do you have any new ones that you can throw at Mel and at Field?
Of course. We have Paul Andrew Edson Jr.
Okay.
Says, hey, Greeny, Mel, and Field, who are the Jets going to pick with the number 32 overall pick in the first round of the 2025 NFL Draft? I'll hang up and listen. Thanks.
Does that suggest that one team is going to have to forfeit, and so that'll be the first pick of round 2?
Oh,
is that what he's suggesting?
The vibes aren't that low
game?
right now, are they?
I tell you what, Paul is on my list. Here's what I get. Well,
wide receiver will be on the list right now, right?
Here's my question.
Okay.
I think it's much too early to say the Jets are going to have a bad year, but you have a 40-year-old quarterback anyway.
Yeah.
So at what point, if you're the Jets, let's even say things go relatively well this year, but you don't win the Super Bowl. Let's live in a world where the Jets go 11-6 and get, knocked out in the playoffs. They need to be considering, unless we think that they addressed it last year in the later rounds, the Jets at some point need to be considering taking a quarterback anyway, right?
I don't believe so, and here's the reason why. Well, let me categorize that. If it's the same regime coming back next year at the control panels for the Jets, Joe Douglas and Robert Saleh, I think they understand that their fate is year to year, right? One step backwards and they're probably all gone. That's the pressure of New York when you have a quarterback who's been the NFL MVP 4 times. I do think the Jets are about to win 4 straight games, by the way. That's neither here nor there. But if it's the same people at the control panels, they're saying every asset we have to play, we've got to put towards players that can help us win the Super Bowl the upcoming year. If it's a new regime, yes, there's going to be some working with Aaron about what he thinks are the most important roster decisions. But there's also the capacity to say, hey, you're 40 years old. We know that you're week to week now. We have to protect ourselves. But I think if I'm the Jets right now, just based purely off of what we saw last night, or whatever it was, week 1 Monday Night Football, Green, which is an entirely too small sample size. One more difference maker in the passing game. That to me felt very clear. One more difference maker in the passing game would go a long way towards unlocking some of the good stuff the Jets do have to bring to the table.
I disagree with you, Field, on that. I'm kind of with Green. I think quarterback has to be in play. And I say it for this reason. You mentioned where the organization is. If they're winning this year, and I'm not going to panic after week one, I still think the Jets are going to be a playoff caliber team. And they have a game this week against a Tennessee Titan team that is reeling right now. You saw how the wheels came off with the block punt, then Will trying to be Superman when he didn't need to and just get the ball out of his hand. And he wasn't trying to get the ball to a receiver. He was just trying to get the ball and save some yardage, which he shouldn't have done. And it backfired. But they're coming off that game and an offensive line that had trouble protecting and had an injury at guard against this Jet team. It's the first home game for Tennessee. That's a terrible spot. If your team, the Jets, don't win by 3 or 4 touchdowns, something's wrong in that game. They're only I would say 4.5 point favorite, which is what they were, is ridiculous. But that should be an easy win for the Jets. If it's not, then they are in trouble. But I think if they are picking in the 20s, then quarterback could be in play. Because guess what? If they're a playoff team, then Joe Douglas is back. And he's feeling pretty good that, hey, Aaron Rodgers did well. We won. We got into playoffs. Maybe we won a playoff game, and Aaron's still there. Aaron's 40, going to be 41. He's still going to play a couple years. But we got to keep in mind when Aaron Rodgers entered, I believe it was year 4, and wasn't doing anything. They drafted Brian Brom, the Packers did, in the 2nd round.
Unbelievable.
When they knew Aaron was going to be the starter that year, they still drafted Brian Brom in the 2nd round, which means they didn't really know what they had in Aaron Rodgers. They were hoping Aaron Rodgers, but why would you draft Brian Brom in the 2nd round when you got Aaron Rodgers just sat for all those years, and now he's going to be our guy, and that same year he's going to be our guy, we're going out and taking Brian Brom in round 2. I think you got to do it. If the quarterback you like, Field and Greeny, is there, if it's Cam Ward you love, if it's Jalen Milroe you love, if Shedeur Sanders for some reason drops down or whatever, and people are down, if it just so happens where the quarterback you love is there, fine. If you don't, then you don't take them, obviously. But if it's a quarterback, it's got to be in play, because I think they would feel secure enough in the 20s, feel like, hey, we're not drafting a quarterback for the next regime. We're drafting a quarterback for our owner. It's going to be developed the right way, and he's going to be the heir apparent to Aaron. Green Bay's developed. They developed Aaron Rodgers when Brett Favre was there. They developed Jordan Love when Aaron was there. Now the Jets can take that same formula and have a couple years to develop their quarterback, who would be the heir apparent to Aaron Rodgers if it goes well this year and the Jets are a playoff team.
We are now 2 for 2, meaning going way longer than we intended to, and that is because you guys are just
sorry.
By the time we all reconvene again, Field Yates will have had shoulder surgery. Field, we wish you the very best of luck there, or a speedy recovery.
Thank you so much. I'll be happy to be on the other side of it. Mel has already promised that he would drive up to Connecticut and take care of me as much as needed, because Mel's that kind of guy.
They got a room waiting for you. We can do the podcast together down here while you're getting back to 100%.
I can't wait.
All right, that's it for week number 2 of this First Draft podcast. Do not forget to like and subscribe to our podcast and tune in every Thursday during the season for full NFL draft analysis, and keep tweeting those questions. I promise as the weeks go on, we'll get them in earlier and earlier in the show so we make sure they make it. For Mel and for Field, I am Greeny. We will see you next week.